Hey everyone, and welcome back to Oh That Girl Reads. I'm your host, Bria, and I cannot describe to you the literal hell that I've gone through in order to record this episode. I'm trying to be more consistent with, my podcast as well as my booktube channel. And I just feel as soon as I was like, okay, I'm ready for the consistency. I'm ready to dive in and be all up on it. Everything went to shit. So first off, if you don't know, I've been having such trouble with my mic, and there was this one episode I recorded and I loved that episode so much, and it was a complete fail because I literally recorded the whole entire episode, and then when I go to listen back to it to edit, it's just glitching the whole entire time. And so luckily for me, I had another episode in the bank, and so I just put that one out instead. But I was like, okay, I'll just resolve this. And same thing happened yesterday. I went ahead and I went to record the episode, and it just did not work out. It didn't work out at all. But I'm here, I'm back, and I'm thriving. I had to do something really funky with using my laptop. My desktop will not turn on now. Um, so I had to use my old spaceship laptop. It's like one of the recalled MacBooks from 2015 that I'm still using. I mean, did the battery kind of explode a little bit? Yes, but you know what? I needed iMovie. I had to get my old MacBook out and make it happen. I just had to make it happen. So I'm using iMovie. I'm recording on my camera, and hopefully, if I'm able to, I'll just go ahead and edit in iMovie and just export it. Luckily, this is just a podcast episode, so it's like the editing isn't as involved, especially since I am by myself currently. Um, but I just wanted to hop in here and talk to you guys because I had the most interesting reading experience the other day. This week I started a 24-hour reading challenge where essentially you read for 24 hours. I decided not to read for 24 hours straight. I decided to instead just time myself. So with each thing that I planned to read, I was just going to hit the timer, and then I was going to go ahead and just read for however long I wanted. And when I stopped reading, I'll just hit the timer again. And eventually that would accumulate to 24 hours. I was kind of excited to do this because I wanted to see how much reading I could actually achieve in 24 hours. And I found out that a 250 page book takes me about 4 hours. So that was kind of nice to know. However, I only read one book, and it's sitting right here with me. I only read one book, and it is Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. And this book was traumatizing. It was it was absolutely traumatizing. And I knew the trigger warnings going into this book. This book follows a family who's had generations upon generation of trauma, and it mostly follows the women in this family. And oh my god, and they're all black women. They're all black women, and I really love literary fiction that spans across generations that specifically deal with black women, because for me personally, I've had this thing within the past few years where I have this yearning to know the women who've came before me, so my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers. I had this strong desire to be connected, and I think for me as a black woman growing up in a predominantly white space, I don't really have that community that I desire to have around me. And so when I read books like this, it really, really helps kind of soothe that loneliness that I feel not having a community of black women surrounding me. However, this book, it deals with a lot of heavy topics. If you're interested in reading this at all, some of the trigger warnings that I would personally give are trigger warnings for rape and sexual assault on children specifically, marital abuse, spousal abuse, gang violence, racism. This is some of this book. The book spans over 70 years, so you do get a lot of talk about like racism and the civil rights era. You also do get a lot of like talk about PTSD and military trauma, and you also get some trauma in relation to 9/11. And in the first like few chapters of this book, it is heavy hitting. Like it is like not like straight in. I think you kind of get eased into it a little bit, but when it starts to happen and when you start to piece certain things together, man, oh man, did it make my stomach drop. And I oh my gosh, it threw me for a loop. I actually had a reading vlog of everything for the 24-hour reading challenge, and you'll kind of see like my reactions over that time. And I genuinely was traumatized. I didn't realize it. I had to take a break at one point, and I was like, oh, this is kind of a lot. I was really surprised. I was taken by surprise that I actually needed to take a step back from a book like this, because usually I don't. Usually I kind of know like what's kind of happening and what I don't know. I can kind of gauge a little bit better like how I'm going to react to things. But for some reason, this one just really hit it on the head. And I feel like part of it, I feel like it's because it reflects some of my own past family trauma. But I think the thing that mostly stuck out to me was the fact that like the girl who was sexually assaulted in this story had to stay in a house with her abuser. And like everyone kind of knew about it. And like that's kind of like one of the main things about the story. So sorry if that was like a trigger or a spoiler. But I think that's like what really threw me about this story. I really enjoyed it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like the writing in it, it was beautiful. And like the way we talk about Black womanhood and the way we talk about how Black women come together and how they uphold the family structure, and like how no matter what, a Black mother will make sure her Black girls survive. I think that is like such a poignant part of the story, and I don't regret interacting with this text at all. But what I do want to talk about today is how do we recover from when we read triggering stories? How do we handle our triggers? How do we handle our reactions? How do we move forward and create a self-care plan when we're engaging in media that can be really intense? This isn't the first time that I've read something and I needed to take action after the fact for my mental health. If y'all follow me on TikTok, you'll have seen my recent bookstore vlog where I actually go into Barnes & Nobles and point out how much I hate the Ice Planet Barbarian series by Ruby Dixon. And I DNF'd that series after a chapter because no one gave a trigger warning about the brutal sexual assault scene that happens in the first chapter. No one who reads the series and who's a fan of it, I swear to you, no one actually talks about that brutal scene. And so if they don't talk about it and they don't actually give a trigger warning, I actually block them immediately. But that's for the sake of my own mental health. And it's because I had the most insane panic attack after reading that scene. And it was brutal. Like it was like the scene went on for like a page and a half. And it was witnessed by multiple characters. And somehow I'm supposed to believe that there's going to be romance and happiness after I witnessed this. It was horrifying. It was literally horrifying. And I put it down. And I remember I think I did ship it back to Amazon. I did ship it back to Amazon, but I actually debated like tearing that book up. Like that's how like freaked out I was. And I went onto Amazon and I was like, I wrote a review about like the trigger warnings, and I was like, honestly, anyone who tells you to read this book without telling you that about that scene is an awful person. I literally think they're awful people if they don't tell you about it. It's horrible. It is rough. After that, and I've been like triggered before by things like Queenie by, oh my gosh, I can't remember her first name, but I know it's Cardi Williams. Queenie was triggering for me. I heavily related to Queenie, but there is this scene where these scenes where she's just allowing herself to be kind of like used and abused by men, um, and kind of intentionally seeking out these men to be used and abused by, and that's out of like a insecurity thing, and it's something that I related to, and that's why it triggered me, and so I had to enact a self-care plan then. And sometimes the self-care plan is, oh, I'm gonna just like DNF the book and move on. That's like why I'm like such an advocate for DNFing books, which means do not finish if you were unaware. But that's why I'm such an advocate for DNFing books, because why would you sit and torture yourself just to say you read something? You know, why would you sit and torture yourself just to say, I gave it a chance? You did give it a chance. If honestly, for me, if it doesn't pass the first page test in the bookstore, I'm not buying it. And if it doesn't pass the 50-page test while I'm reading it, I'm DNFing it. It's over. It's over. And as soon as something happens where I'm like, wow, this is not where I was going to go and I was unprepared for this, I'm also DNFing it. I am the queen of DNFing, in the sense that I always give myself the option to DNF. I rarely DNF, but I am the queen of it. If I have to DNF something, I will, and I won't feel bad about it. And you shouldn't either. And so when I was interacting with like this book though, in particular, let's get back to Memphis. The reason why I had to sit and assess like the reason why I was so triggered by this book. And it became this whole layered experience of why I was triggered by this book. Like, it wasn't like, oh, like, I felt so unprepared, or I just felt, taken by surprise by what was happening. Like, I knew that if we're talking about Black women in literary fiction, at some point we're going to talk about the hard stuff. And we're going to talk about the hard reality stuff. And we did. But this book, for some reason, I don't know, there's some elements in it where I just felt sad. It was like this like deep sadness and like this aching loneliness. And like these women were going through the ringer, but each and every chapter, I felt like these women were like, I got you, no matter what. This is all a mess, but I have you. A lot of things has happened, but I'm showing up for you. And I don't have that like Black female community around me. And it's specific, like I know, like having female friends is important anyway, just in general, but having female friends who get you, who like know you, who can relate to your history is so different. And I grew up in a predominantly white area. So like when I was reading this and I was reading the situations and the things that happen, it's like I can relate to all of this. But at the end of it, I didn't have like these avenues to go to. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart completely. And so that was like one of the realizations that kind of came up for me. But it was also this deep anger about certain situations that occurred in this book that like really just gutted me. Like the mother, there's something she says, and I'm gonna try to pull it up. In a way, it's like while this triggered me, I feel like this is a book that I would definitely recommend. Like I really enjoyed the book that much, and I felt like the pacing was good. I felt like I kept on wanting to read it. Like, it's not that I wanted to set it down. I kept on wanting to read it, but it was the fact that I was having such a mental reaction that, like, I had to slow myself down. And the writing is just beautiful. But anyway, so it says, the things women do for the sake of their daughters, the things women don't, the shame of it all. And it was just like, it was this thing. And this same thing kind of popped up in Post Traumatic by Chantel V. Johnson, where we think about like women specifically and mothers and family structures, and how, and the fact that I'm talking just about women too points out a certain thing as well. But we, like, you think about women in family structures and how they see these abusers. They see people who can hurt innocents, whether it's a child or another adult. They see it, and rather than confronting the abuser and outcasting the abuser, they turn to the victims and try to micromanage the behavior and try to save the victims before anything happens. But that's also putting the blame of an event happening onto the victim. And I see it. I see it clearly as protection, and I see it clearly as complacency as well. And so it's like the things that women do for their daughters. Like the mothers in these stories, they would go through great lengths to make sure that the daughters are okay. Miriam snatched up her two girls and went running across the country by herself as a black woman in 1995 on a road trip all alone. And when she needed help, her car broke down. She had to depend on people who could hurt her, you know? But she did it for the sake of her daughters, for the sake of their future. But another thing that she didn't do was outcast other people who could hurt her. And it was just, I don't know. She kind of did that thing where it's kind of like, I'm going to micromanage your behavior and what you do in order to keep you from being hurt again, other than outcasting the person that can hurt you. And you kind of see this a lot in like Black communities. When I went to a psychiatrist, she was a Hispanic woman. She came from a Mexican household. She said it happens in her community as well, where they kind of just protect these abusers. And she was like, I don't know why. And, you know, think about it now. And I think we've also had this kind of discussion in the book club that I'm in, Women versus the Void. And we were talking about like how there is this thing where the worst punishment for a Black person, I can only really speak for Black people, and I've had this discussion a few times before too in undergrad, is that the worst punishment for a Black person is to be excommunicated from their community. Because like whiteness and white supremacy and racism has did so much to separate us. It did so much to beat us down and ruin our family structures that like when it comes to our own, we don't want to further separate our families. But then on top of that, it's like you're almost, when you separate a person from like their community, you're basically leaving them out to die. That's like the mindset, is that we're leaving this person, this family member, out to die. And it's kind of said in here too, where it's like Miriam's thinking about this family member and saying, I'm so angry at him, but I don't hate him. I pity him because he's my blood. Like that's the thing. She kept on saying like, I don't hate him. I pity him because he's my blood. And blood's like not enough. It's not enough to leave your other kin vulnerable. And so I think that's like a part of me that got really triggered and angry as well, because it's kind of like, well, you're choosing to not kill, I guess in your mindset, you're choosing not to kill this person at the expense of the innocent, you know? And I think, and it was just hard for me, and it's like, it was hard for me to deal with because I felt like very much in their heads when they were making decisions, like understanding why they're making these decisions, but also being absolutely furious with myself and with them for understanding. I was furious with myself for understanding, and I was furious with them for not doing more. And I was furious at the end where it felt like our victim was meant, or Survivor more like, was always meant to magically forgive them, and that they could only forgive them, or they could only move on if they forgave them, which I feel like is some truth to it, because that talks more about like inner peace. But I just felt so angry. I felt so angry. But the thing is like, I understand this whole entire story. I understand its complexities. I see its complexities, but it just left me real heartbroken. It really did. And so I had to assess all that. I had to assess all that and take it in and be like, okay, so these are the reasons why I'm upset. And the first thing after that was being like, okay, so these are the reasons why I'm upset. Do I feel safe enough to continue reading this book? Like, on the scale of 1 to 10, like, how unsafe do I feel? And I felt, because at the time when I was kind of like, I can't read this anymore, I literally heard an inner voice say to me, I can't do this right now. And once I heard that I can't do this right now, I stopped and I was like, okay, like, do you feel safe? And I like took a scan of my body. I took a scan of, my headspace. And I was like, yeah, I feel safe, but I feel really on edge. And I was like, okay, you feel on edge. What is it? And, at the time, it was a specific scene that just happened. And it was at the very beginning of the book in part 1. And it was very descriptive. And I was like, I can't do it. And usually my hands shake, or I start fiddling with my hands and stuff like that when I have a lot of anxiety. I didn't feel any of that, but I was just kind of like, okay, if I push it, like, I'm going to send myself into a panic attack. And so I was like, okay, all right. So X, Y, and Z made you feel this way. You do feel safe. However, you just can't read anymore. You only have 2 pages left of this chapter. Are you willing to read, like, the 2 pages? Are you okay reading the 2 pages? Because the big event thing did already happen, and now they're on to something else. But do you feel okay? And so I scanned the page, and I was like, okay, I feel okay with this. And I'm kind of glad that I got to that point, because there was a moment of relief after that thing happened. There was a moment of like, it was an important moment of relief that happened right after that. So I'm kind of glad that I did. And then after that, I just closed the book and we were done for the day. I didn't read a single thing. All I did was watch Schitt's Creek. I was like, I don't know what I need right now. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I know the right thing to do is to separate. I needed to actually put physical distance between me and the book. And so I put the book upstairs and I stayed my ass downstairs. And I just took care of myself. I made myself lunch. I just hung out a little bit, scrolled through TikTok. I was really, really in tune with my body. And there was a moment where I felt really agitated. And that's when I did a Chloe Ting workout, because I needed to sweat. Like, it was like some nervous, agitated energy that was happening. And my thing is like, I wanted to prevent the event of a panic attack, especially because right now I'm alone. I don't have anyone who can kind of be my support person in a panic attack right now. And it would freak my family out if I called them in the midst of one. And I needed to be able to self-regulate. And so after that, like, after having a day, I didn't think about it for the rest of that night. The next day, I really did want to finish the book. And I felt so disappointed that I had to put the book down. And I had to confront that feeling of disappointment. Like, why can't I read this? And why can't I read that? And, like, if you ever feel like, oh my gosh, like, I'm missing out on a book because of certain triggers of mine or certain topics, and it makes me angry. And it makes me upset at myself, and I hate that I'm like this. And if you ever feel yourself getting like in that negative loop, I promise you, you are not missing out on anything that is worth your mental health. I promise you. I promise you. Like, I told someone, like, I don't know, they were asking about the Throne of Glass series, and they're like, but I knew that this person doesn't do well with torture. I knew that this person doesn't do well with torture. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about reading this book. And I was like, okay, if you're thinking about reading this book, look up, actually look up the page numbers and chapters where characters are being tortured and skip those. And she's like, oh no. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you can still take part, but just be really aware about what's happening, Don't feel like you have to be a part of every single book trend or every single thing that happens. That's not important. What is important is you actually enjoying the reading that you do. And so once I realized how disappointed I was and how personally I was taking it, I was like, well, no, girl, I care about you. I care about you enjoying your reading experience. And so we're just going to take in the disappointment, and we're going to take the morning, and in the afternoon, if you feel like you can read this, then we'll read it. But if you still feel like you can't read it after everything, then we're not going to read it. You know what I'm saying? We're going to DNF it. And I felt such sadness over DNFing it that I was kind of I'm willing to take this slowly in order to read the story, because there is a part of me that really loved the story. All that to say is that I did finish the book, and I decided that for me, the best thing to do when I am feeling triggered in anything that I'm reading is to, one, slow down. As soon as I've gotten really good too, and this comes with time, I am going to assess how I'm feeling throughout reading. And this kind of comes with time. The ability to listen to your inner voice, that has been built up through therapy, honestly, because my inner voice has been destroyed throughout my childhood. But we've kind of rebuilt it out of therapy, and sometimes it takes some time, and sometimes your inner voice sounds different too. So you kind of have to relearn how to listen to that, really. And so once I heard myself be like, whoa, I really can't do this right now, I was like, okay, full on stop. Because in terms of your reading, in terms of you taking in media or content, you are your own advocate. You have to self-advocate against yourself, against your desires and your wants to be a part of a certain, group of people who read or engaged in something. For me, I wanted to be a Game of Thrones girly so bad, but those rape scenes, I saw one of them. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I was shook for months. Absolutely not. Could not do it. I decided, okay, well, do I care more about my mental well-being, or do I care more about being a part of a fandom who is, I guess, really upset with how the series turned out anyway? So maybe I'm glad I'm not a part of that. And so that's a decision that I had to make. And that was the best decision that I made for myself. I'm very happy with that decision. And so that's step one, right? Listening to yourself. Step two is kind of assessing the situation and being kind of what is it exactly? And if you don't know what it is, that's perfectly fine too. If you don't know, okay, I don't know why I'm so freaked out right now, or I don't know why I'm not feeling it. It's okay. Set it down. DNF it. And also know that DNFs are not permanent. Sometimes it's right book, wrong time. Crying in H Mart, for example, it follows a daughter who lost her mother to cancer. My mother is currently fighting cancer. I cannot read that book right now. Maybe after my mommy rings the bell, I'll pick it up. But until then, I can't do Crying in H Mart. It ain't gonna happen. 3, knowing what you're gonna do afterward really helps. So my initial plan after, freaking out, my initial plan was to just go ahead and do other bookish things. So I was going to make other book content, maybe film a YouTube video, maybe edit my YouTube video, record the podcast. I did record the podcast and it just didn't work out. And that's fine. I kind of like how this came to be anyway. So it was kind of a happy accident. But then at the end of it, I just realized I needed to sit my butt down and just watch Schitt's Creek and watch, the beautiful happy ending. Of it. I just need to enjoy it and eat a bacon, egg, and cheese and just chill out and relax and finish my work for the day. That's all I needed. I didn't need to do anything crazy, okay? And I just watched TikToks and scrolled. I needed to chill out, okay? And then the next thing and the last thing was deciding whether or not I was going to return back to it and thinking about why. And really kind of addressing that feeling of missing out and being like, am I afraid of missing out, or am I afraid of like losing my mental health, or am I afraid of like not reading something that could mean something deeply to me? And while I feel like I only had negative things to say about Memphis so far, I can't describe to you the amount of beauty and the artistry that is involved in this book. I feel like it is one of those books that you do have to read in order to connect with it. But I also know that it is one of those books that hurt. And another book that hurt to me was The Women of Brewster's Place. There is also like a really brutal sexual assault scene that kind of, I think it goes on for like 2 pages or so. And that book hurts, okay? But then that book also gave me such breath at the same time. And I think Memphis is the same way to me. It hurt me and gave me breath at the same time. And I hope that makes sense. But I hope what I shared with you today kind of helps you or resonates with you in terms of reading, in terms of taking in content. Your mental health matters in everything that you do. Your safety and your well-being matters in anything that you engage with. And I think sometimes too, like, we feel this pressure either by like, you know, people that we know, or just like what's popular in pop culture. We feel this pressure to be involved with everything. Like, I couldn't watch The Blacklist. It was so brutal for no reason. I hear girls who are like, yeah, like, my boyfriend doesn't understand why I can't watch XYZ show because of like the rape scenes, and I'm too sensitive to them, and they get mad at me that I don't want to watch it with them. And all I can say to that is that you know yourself more than anyone, and you are the true advocate for yourself. You're going to be advocating for yourself to the day you die, and you deserve to feel safe and happy in the leisurely media that you consume. You can choose to turn it off at any time. You can choose to close the book at any time. You can say no at any time. And that is your right. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm glad I pushed through and got this done. I feel like it's going to be hell on earth to edit, but again, we'll get through it. Again, I am your host, Bria, and I was so happy to be here with you, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye. So long, everyone, and thank you again for joining me today. I would love to see more of you, so feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Garden 75th. And if you'd like to see even more book content, you can find my YouTube channel, Bria L, linked in the show notes. Remember, read what you love and DNF the rest. Bye.